Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Julie Zuckerman, the author of the book of Jeremiah, and welcome to the February Literary Modiin author event. Before we get started, I'm going to say a few words of introduction. Some of you have been here many times, but for some of you are new, so just bear with me with my spiel again. For those of you who aren't familiar, Modiin is a planned city in Israel, about halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, near the airport. And I heard they're doing away with all restrictions for tourists, so now you can all come and visit. Literary Modiin was started about 3 years ago. We have a large population of English speakers here in Modiin. So in June 2019, I started this as a way to bring local Israel-based authors to the large community of English readers we have here. And we held a few in-person events, but then when the pandemic hit, we switched to virtual, which has allowed us to hear from authors and welcome attendees from all over the world. Today's event is our 21st. I'm going to share my screen for 1 second so you can see some of the books that we posted, or the authors we posted. Sec. I'm going to send out a link tomorrow so you can check these out. But please do check out the book, all of these books. Geula, you're going to have to tell us how we can get your book because it's not on Bookshop. But and we have a lot of our authors who presented previously with us tonight. So welcome, everyone. And okay, there we go. Stop share. The format of today's event is that each author will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we open it up to questions. We have a large attendance today, so everyone is on mute, but you can put your questions in the chat box, or maybe later I'll ask you to unmute. If you have any technical difficulties, you can send a private note in the chat to me. And we're broadcasting this live on Facebook and Literary Modiin Facebook group, so feel free to start a watch party. Oh, and the one last thing I'd like to say is usually I only plan these events like a month in advance, but I happen to have the next 3 months already planned. So let me just, 1 sec, share my screen one more time and you can see who's coming the next few months. And in tomorrow's email, I'll send out the links so you can already register for the next events. So we have next month Ben Sharafsky coming from Australia, Rena Rosner from Jerusalem, and Derek Miller, who's currently based in Barcelona. In April, we have Omer Friedlander, Rutu Modiin, and Patrick Hicks. And in May, we have Ilan Barnehama, which I'm not saying properly, and you're on the call tonight, so you'll have to correct me. Rachel Berenbaum and Chaviva Ner David. So really excited about this lineup we have for the next few months. Okay, back to our authors from tonight. Dan Grunfeld is a former professional basketball player, an accomplished writer, and a proud graduate of Stanford University. An academic All-American and an all-conference basketball selection at Stanford. Dan played professionally for 8 seasons in top leagues around the world, including in Germany, Spain, and Israel. Dan's writing has been published more than 40 times in media outlets such as Sports Illustrated, the Jerusalem Post, and NBC News. Dan earned his MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business in 2017 and lives with his wife and son in the San Francisco Bay Area, although he's in DC right now, and he works in venture capital. We got to talk about that afterwards, Dan, because I work in high tech. And this is his book, By the Grace of the Game, The Holocaust, A Basketball Legacy, and an Unprecedented American Dream. So Dan, I'm going to spotlight you and take it away. Okay, asked to unmute. Yeah.
Here I am. All right. Awesome. Julie, thank you so much for that warm introduction. Thanks to everyone for coming today, and to Hannah and Geula as well, my co-authors here. I'm excited to spend a little bit of time with you. I'll talk for about 12 to 15 minutes, tell you about myself, my book, read a short passage, and then my co-authors here will go, and then of course we'll have a nice little dialogue afterwards. So as Julie mentioned, Dan Grunfeld, played professional basketball in Israel, so I know Modiin well. I played in Herzliya for 2 years and Jerusalem for 2 years. So when you talk about in the middle of those two places, right, it is Modiin. So spent a lot of time in Israel. Again, played at Stanford. I had a nice basketball career, but my dad is really a legend in the game of basketball. So he was a high school All-American, a college All-American. He played 9 years in the NBA. And then he was an NBA executive for 30 years. So he was the general manager of the New York Knicks, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Washington Wizards. And so he's in many Hall of Fames and is a very well-known figure, not only in basketball, but the world of sports. What few people know is that he's the only player in NBA history whose parents survived the Holocaust. And in fact, the research suggests he's the only player in the history of the 4 major sports leagues in America whose parents survived the Holocaust. So both my grandparents are survivors. You'll be happy to know my grandmother is 96 years old, lives 25 minutes from me and my wife in the Bay Area, is still doing amazingly well. Julia's read my book. She'll tell you, she's the hero of the book. She's the star of the book. My dad said recently, I played basketball and my son wrote a book, but my mother is a hero. And that's the truth. And Julie knows this from the book. She not only saved herself during the Holocaust, she risked her life to save others. And so that's really where my family story begins. My grandmother is from Transylvania on the border of Romania and Hungary. She happened to be visiting an older sister in Budapest when the Nazis invaded. So she had a chance to survive on the run on the streets of Budapest. I'm sure many of you here have visited the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. If you haven't, I recommend doing it when you're in the States. I always tell people, you don't leave the museum the same person you walk in as. I think it's a very important and meaningful thing for all people to do, certainly Jewish people. But the street that the museum is on is called Raoul Wallenberg Way. Many of you may know of Raoul Wallenberg. He's a Swedish diplomat regarded as one of the greatest heroes of the Holocaust, credited for saving roughly 100,000 Jews. My grandmother was one of them, and Wallenberg saved my grandmother's life twice. So the first instance, he issued protective passports called Schutz passes, and my grandmother was able to get one from herself, but she also risked her life to obtain 17 for other people. So that's why I say she's my hero, but she's also a hero. She really is. And so that was the first time. Eventually, that Schutz pass was no longer recognized, and my grandmother was apprehended by the Nazis, was put in the Budapest ghetto. And at the end of the war, she was in the ghetto with one of her brothers. She saw 20 Nazis come into the ghetto with machine guns over their shoulders. And word quickly spread that they were going to kill the remaining 80,000 Jews in the ghetto. And so my grandmother and her brother raced up to an attic space and they hid in there. And my grandmother still tells this story. There was room for roughly 4 or 5 people, and there was like a dozen in there, fighting for their lives. And they waited for 5 minutes and then 20 minutes and then an hour, and nothing happened. And eventually they had someone check, and the Nazis had left the ghetto. It was clear they were free to go. It's really how my grandmother survived. That was in 1945. 40 years later, in 1985, my grandmother had made good in the United States. She was living in the Bay Area. My dad was this huge basketball star, and we'll get to kind of how that transition happened. A movie came out of Raoul Wallenberg. Richard Chamberlain played Wallenberg, and my grandma, of course, had the date circled on her calendar. And in that movie, one of the final scenes, she saw Nazis enter the ghetto with an order from Adolf Eichmann to kill the remaining Jews in the ghetto. And it was Wallenberg who got in his car and raced to the Budapest ghetto and confronted the general and said, "Let these people go. You'll hang for this. These are innocent people. The war is over." And he did. And so it took my grandmother 40 years to learn that Wallenberg saved her life, not just once, but twice during the war. And so hopefully you'll read my book and you'll see the symbol that Wallenberg is, in my life and my family's life, right? I talk to a lot of young groups about my book, which came out about 3 months ago. And I tell people, if you want to know what a hero looks like, just Google Raoul Wallenberg and look at his face. And so that's how my grandmother survived. She lost both parents and 5 siblings in the war. And so both parents killed in Auschwitz, three siblings killed in Auschwitz, another sister killed on a death march in Budapest, and a brother killed in a working camp in the Ukraine. If you read my book, you'll learn their stories. They're not just numbers, they're people. And that's one of the things that's most fulfilling about my book, is that I can, say to my grandma now, our family lives forever, right? Their memories will never be forgotten. Their stories are told in my book. And my grandma's always said to me, they have no graves to visit. They just were sent to Auschwitz and never heard from again. So it's one of the things I'm most proud of about my book is that now their stories live forever. And so my grandfather survived a forced labor camp in Hungary. The rest of his family was killed, everyone, siblings, parents. And so when he came back, he had nobody. And people asked me, when did your grandparents meet? They both survived the war. Your dad became this big basketball star. How does it all connect? My grandparents met the day my grandmother got back from the war. All she had was a thin cotton dress and a blue overcoat, and her brother was already home. And he said, we need to get you some clothes. I was in the labor camp in Hungary with a man that I became friends with. He opened up a store nearby when we were liberated. Let's go get you some clothes. And so it was that day that my grandmother walked through my grandfather's doors to his store to get clothes. And so, how it is after the Holocaust, right? People wanted to start families very quickly. That's what my family did. And so my uncle was born, shortly after my grandparents were married. My dad was born 8 years later. And so I mentioned my dad. You can Google him. His name's Ernie Grunfeld, right? Very, very prominent basketball figure in the world of sports. He was just a little boy born under communism in Romania. It took my family more than a decade to flee Romania. They actually had visas and passports to go to Israel. It was the state of Israel that paid for Jews to be able to leave. They spent 6 months in Rome before going to Israel, and at the last minute had a chance to come to the United States. And so that's where my family ended up, Queens, New York. And so when they got to the United States, they were already living the American dream because they had a chance to have freedom to work for a living. My grandparents had a chance to provide for their kids. That's all parents want to do. When they got to the States, almost immediately, my uncle was diagnosed with leukemia, and he passed away within a year. And so that's probably the biggest tragedy in the history of my family. And I'm named after my uncle. My middle name is Leslie, and his name in Hungarian was Lutzi, but English name was Leslie. And so if you think about my grandparents surviving the war, fleeing communism, coming to the United States and losing a son, and for my dad to lose his older brother. And by the way, what my dad called his brother in Hungarian translates to English as my king. That's how much my dad loved and revered his older brother. And so my grandparents had to work, 6-7 days a week to build a life. And so my dad did what other kids in New York City were doing. He went to the local playground, and what they did there was play basketball. And he always says to me, he just wanted to make friends, learn English, and really to heal from that loss. So he started playing basketball. He didn't speak a word of English when they got to the United States and had never touched a basketball. And he says, hey, if you could play ball in New York at the park, you made friends. That's how you made friends. And that's what I wanted to do. And I can look him in the eyes and say, well, you must have made a lot of friends, because sometimes things just click. And that's how it was for my dad. And so he very quickly became a good player, and then a very good player, and then the best player at the park, and then the best player in the neighborhood, best player in the city, one of the best players in the country. And so, and throughout my book, I juxtapose my family's journey with my own, right? Because I grew up different. I grew up privileged. My dad was a general manager of the New York Knicks when I was a kid, and he was a player for the Knicks when I was born. And actually, as Julie could tell you, my birth was planned around the NBA schedule. My dad had 2 long road trips. So he took a road trip. He was there for my birth. He took another road trip. He was there for my bris. So my parents planned it out very well. And I write in my book, it's Judaism and basketball are really the main threads in my family's life. And that was reflected from day one for me. But, so I always wanted to play in the NBA. I wanted to play at Stanford since I was in 7th grade. And through a combination of luck, skill, timing, I made that happen. I got very close to the NBA and had a nice career. And so, my book alternates back and forth between my family's journey and my own, which are so similar yet so different. But for my dad, he had no such illusions of being a basketball star. He just played the game because it took him away from being born from the shadows of the Holocaust and losing his brother. And my grandparents didn't see my dad play basketball until he was a junior in high school, when they got a call at their fabric store from his high school coach saying, you need to see this. And Julie could I go into great detail about this scene in the book, and you could read it there. But let's just say on the court after that first game, my grandfather said to my dad, because my grandfather used to make my dad come to their fabric store and work. And my grandfather told him, never come to the store again. You just work on your basketball. We'll take care of the rest. And so a year later, he was an All-American in high school. He went to the University of Tennessee, where he was an All-American. He graduated as the school's all-time leading scorer. To this day, he's the 5th leading scorer in the history of the SEC, which is the best conference in the country for basketball. One of the most amazing things, and I'll read you a short passage from this part of the book because I think it really, it is the apex of this story and this American dream story. Roughly 10 years after coming to America, again, not speaking English, having never touched a basketball, losing his brother, my dad stood on the top of the Olympic podium as a gold medalist for the United States of America. And so Julie read the subtitle of my book. It says an unprecedented American dream, right? That's why, I mean, not only has it never happened that someone's parents survived the Holocaust and then becomes, a major American athlete in one of the major sports, but he's also became an Olympic gold medalist for the United States of America. And so that's the story I tell. Again, my book's been out 3 months. The reception has really been incredible. It was International Holocaust Remembrance Day a few weeks ago, and I was on Good Morning America, and I was on, the NBA on TNT, where I heard Shaquille O'Neal speak Hebrew while talking about my family story, which was very cool. So it's unfortunately timely right now, because of course, the spike of anti-Semitism, so much lack of awareness, misinformation about the Holocaust. And so, Julie, you mentioned, right, I work in venture capital. I have a day job. For me, this book it means more than anything, telling this story, sharing this story. And so I'm so grateful to spend the time with you all. And of course, anyone who is interested in picking up a copy of the book and engaging with it means so much to me. So let me finish off by reading a very short passage from when my dad became a gold medalist. And by the way, the reason my grandparents never saw my dad play in high school until he was a junior is because they'd have to close their fabric store early to watch him play, which of course, they're immigrants in the United States. They'll never close their store. That's their work. So eventually they closed the store and saw him. They closed their store for 2 weeks to drive from Queens, New York to Montreal, Canada. So they were in the stands, tears, of course, running down their cheeks when they watched their youngest son stand on the podium to become a gold medalist. So let me read you a very short paragraph. This is the end of the chapter from when my dad becomes a gold medalist for the United States. I have a picture of the moment the gold medal game ends. Dad can be seen running from the bench with a towel over his shoulder and both fists raised high above his head. He's a gold medalist at 21 years old. A faint mustache is sprouting above his lip. It's the precursor to the one he'd sported for decades. Dad's teammates are smiling and hugging near the paint area. Some of them are black, some are white, some are middle class, and some are poor. They're from different states and have different religions. Together, they have become champions of the world. The scoreboard in the picture reads USA 95, Yugoslavia 84. That score was bigger than basketball. It was more than a win over the rest of the world. It was a win over the idea that certain people aren't meant to do certain things because of who they are and where they come from. In the stands, Anyu and Apu, my grandparents, were crying as the game ended. So were their friends, Joe and Helen. So was Dad's coach from Tennessee, Ray Mears. The other parents were crying too. The Olympics represented a lifetime of dreams. For my grandparents, it felt like several lifetimes. They wondered what Lutsica would have thought about this, my late uncle. When Dad stood on the podium and bent his head to have the gold medal placed around his neck, dressed in the stars and stripes, the Star-Spangled Banner echoing through the arena, Anyu was silent. The moment had been sent from heaven. She wasn't sure who'd sent it, but she had some ideas. After the game, when she finally got to see Dad, she threw her arms around him and asked how he was feeling. No one seemed to notice that she did so in Hungarian. And you'll see language is a big thread in my book, right? My dad being a native Hungarian speaker, and a lot of his Olympic teammates, they hear him speak Hungarian with his parents, and they didn't even know why that was, right? Because they thought he was just a guy from Queens, New York. But there's a hidden history there, which of course is reflected in my book. So thank you for taking the time to hear a little bit about it. I'm happy to hand it off, and of course we'll discuss a little bit more in a bit.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much. I'm gonna ask Geula to unmute when I introduce her and spotlight her. I'll add mine. I will. Oh. Okay. Just as I'm finding the little bio here, I have to say, Dan, what you said about the immigrants not taking time off, I'm sure that's very familiar to a lot of us here on the call. My grandfather had a liquor store, and in my book I talk about, it's fiction, but in the characters also, they don't start their seders till 11 o'clock or 11:30 at night when the father comes home from his liquor store. So anyway, okay. Geula Geurts is a Dutch foreign poet and essayist living in Jerusalem. In her work, she explores female physical autonomy, religious repression of the body, early motherhood, and postpartum depression. A 2021 Best of the Net nominee, her work has recently appeared or is forthcoming in Guest House, Pleiades, Salamander, Radar, Calyx, and Echo Theo. Her lyric essay, The Beginnings of Fire, was published by Cutbank Books in the summer of 2021. Her poetry manuscript, Tiny Bones Glowing, was selected as first runner-up in the 2020 Red Hen Press Benjamin Saltman Award and as finalist in the 2021 Brittingham and Felix Pollock Prizes. Her mini chapbook, Like Any Good Daughter, was published by Platypus Press. She is a graduate of the Shane D. Rudolph Graduate Program in Creative Writing at Bar-Ilan University, and she works as a literary agent at the Deborah Harris Agency. So Geula, take it away.
Thank you, Julie, for the introduction and for having us here. Dan, I was very moved by your talk, your introduction, and your reading. Lots of food for thought. I thought about it in connection to my writing, which is, of course, it's a completely different story. But I think that often, I guess, what draws us to writing, if you have these intense obsessions, it's the family. And some family stories, they just need to be told. And I honestly think that your stories is pretty obviously one that needed to be told, and I'm very moved to hear about. So I guess on the topic of obsessions, I'm a poet by nature, and this book that I'm reading from, which is a chapbook, which is a lyric essay, this is what it looks like, and it's not on bookstore or Amazon, but you can buy it from Cutbank Books. It's a small indie press from Cutbank Journal. You can buy it through the press online, or anyone living in Israel or outside of the US can order through me. But a lyric essay is kind of like a natural next step up into, I would say, creative nonfiction for poets. I think it's a natural form for people who write poetry to be able to tell a larger story, because I guess the form of poetry is limited in the sense of how much it can address narrative. So I think that when I first heard about the lyric essay, which was by my professor and poet Marcella Sulak, Dr. Marcella Sulak from Bar-Ilan, I felt very freed, because I had this huge family story that I needed to tell, or a personal story, and I wasn't getting far enough in just poetry. In poetry, I was able to isolate like flashes of moments or scenes and images. But what the lyric essay allows is to use poetic device while also staying true to the essay form, or a more nonfiction or creative nonfiction form. So I've asked Julie, can I share my screen, just because it will be easier for me to read if you can all watch along.
Yeah, you should be able to.
What do? I do add screen. Just wait. Share screen. Okay. Here we go. I haven't done this right. Does it work?
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm just doing this so that in order to explain how the lyric essay works. So first of all, the poetic device that's used is there's a few things. One is repetition, which poetry is very known for, whether it's a form of a litany or a repetition of images, and specific also very detailed imagery, which engages the senses. I mean, that's like a very short description of poetry, but those are also features that you use in the lyric essay. What I did in this essay is I wove biblical verse, and I used the images from the biblical verse to use them as a spring, to jump off into my own story. So at the time when I was trying to give a form to this personal story that I wanted to tell, which involves a lot of religion, becoming religious, leaving religion, and I guess traumatic religious experiences as a child. And throughout that process, I felt very drawn to biblical verse, which is also, I guess, it makes sense as someone who was drawn to religion and afterwards left religion, I guess in the Orthodox sense. So once I found some biblical verses that were talking about purification and cleansing, I kind of, all of a sudden, I just latched onto those lines. And naturally from there on, I was able to write this essay. I guess I kind of wrote it in one go in a few weeks, because it's kind of like fed all my obsessions. I found these verses that are talking about finding spiritual cleanliness. And in the Bible, there's a verse that says you can find it through fire and water. And from there onwards, I could use the images of fire and water to tell my story. So a lyric essay is kind of like a loom where you weave what in few strands. What I've done here is weaving is the biblical verses. And then I have also historical, some of the historical essay features like the history of Mary Magdalene and some and Jesus, because I'm also dealing with Catholicism and I'm dealing with Judaism, and my father is a convert from Catholicism to Judaism. So I grew up with a lot of these stories from the New Testament, and in my own experience of becoming religious, I really learned a lot of biblical verse, New Testament. Or Torah, if we can say it that way. So the biblical verse that I'm talking about is using both New and Old Testament, and it kind of is linked through associative thought. So one image in the Bible will bring me to a memory from my childhood, and it will be woven into a next biblical scene, and so on and so forth. And I continued doing that until I kind of felt that I had told enough of my story, which I don't know if that's actually true, but this is what came out. And if you see on the page that I'll be reading from chapter 2. In chapter 1, I find out about the verse, the fire and the water. So it's more of like an introductory chapter. And in chapter 2, I'm dealing with fire. And as you see, just so that the reading will be easier, the italics, all biblical verses I've written in italics. So it's difficult for me to give it a different tone when I'm reading, but you'll see it on the page that this is in fact not my personal story, but that these are literal quotes from the Bible. So as you can see here, down here, I mean, this is just what, so I'm going to just be reading from the page in front of us, which will be easier for everyone. Okay. 2. Whatever is used in fire shall pass through fire, and then it will be clean. I don't keep a kosher kitchen anymore. My pots and pans, knives and forks, all impure. But doing the dishes somehow remains the same. When I think I'm done, there's always that last bit of burnt food at the bottom of the pot that won't disappear. Lately, I've been writing about fire. Since I stopped keeping religious customs, poetry has become my new prayer. I remember once seeing a book on Jewish prayer titled Praying with Fire. It sounds powerful, to burn with longing for the Lord. My first memory of fire is the kitchen stove, a small blue flame warming up a pot of porridge, my mother stirring the oats and milk and sugar, watching it all disintegrate, collapse into one another to form a new substance. I hear her mumbling, "This is what we eat. This is what we pray for." The fire on the altar shall be kept burning on it. It shall not go out, but the priest shall burn wood on it every morning. Leviticus 6:12. They say prayer became a substitute for sacrificial worship after the temple was destroyed. We no longer have animals burning for the Lord, so we now need to burn in prayer. I wonder, is praying with fire the same as playing with fire? The question is, What kind of fire? Now Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it and offered strange fire before the Lord. And fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them. Leviticus 10:1. My second memory of fire is my father wailing that he wants to be cremated. He wants to go up in flames. He says this as my mother lights the Friday night candles, covers her eyes so as not to be blinded. She knows that some flames are all-consuming and there will be no one left to bless the good light if she keeps on staring into them. Moses saw God for the first time through a blazing fire, a burning bush, and he hid his face from the light. He was afraid to look upon the Lord. How is it that the burning bush wasn't consumed? Is it fire that can cleanse me? He told me that when he was a boy, he was an altar server. It was his duty to place the votive candles in neat rows on the side altar in the nave of the church. The altar was made of wood. Before he laid the candles down, he filled a tray with sand, placed it on the altar to keep it from catching fire. At the beginning of Mass, he held a candle, while another boy carried the cross. The hot wax dripped onto his hands, stuck to his skin, while the worshippers sang psalms to the Holy Virgin and Christ, the one true light. My father smoked cigars. He was always quitting. He'd say, it's temporary, but for now it helps me breathe. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burnt? Proverbs 6:27. His eyes were always on fire. The question is, how is fire sustained? The question is, how do oxygen, fuel, and heat remain in conversation? The question is, how much breath do you have left to speak? How much body do you have left to give? Did you hear me, he mouths, I will be cremated. My mother opens her mouth into prayer, but she has no breath. In silence, she blesses the Lord, who commanded her to kindle the lights. What can a woman say standing next to a man who is burning from the inside out? After 5 years of strictly adhering to religious modesty, I gradually started uncovering my skin. First my elbows, then parts of my upper arms, eventually my shoulders. Each time I uncovered a new inch of skin, I felt a singeing sensation, as if I was burning with nakedness. If she profanes herself by harlotry, she shall be burned with fire. Leviticus 12:9. I can remember that pain, but I stopped feeling it. He said it started when he was 17. He called it the black hole, an abyss void of all light. He said he fell into it, and when he hit the bottom, he knew he had to leave the church. He knew he had a Jewish soul. His mother was devastated, told him he'd suffer like Jesus had suffered. For the Lord your God is consuming fire, a jealous God. Deuteronomy 4:24. I've started smoking again. When my lungs fill with smoke, my breathing slows down, becomes deep. I tell myself it's temporary, that for now I need help breathing. When did it start? I remember the light in the living room flickered. The wire filament in the bulb was having trouble emitting heat. I remember the red carpet, my father lying on it, his arms spread out horizontally, forming a cross with the rest of his body. He was crying, shouting something about Jesus, his lost friend from childhood. The memory isn't clear because the light kept on flickering. It couldn't decide whether to stay on or off. I want to forget about my father, about religion and the Bible. Why do I keep coming back to the stories, the verses? When you walk through fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you. Isaiah 43:2. Is it fire that can cleanse me? I suck in air through the tobacco, breathe in smoke. The end of the cigarette lights up, an orange-red glow. My cigarette is a little altar and my lungs are the sacrifice. I am an offering burning with longing for the Lord. Is this prayer? I'm stopping here. Thank you.
Thank you, Geula. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Okay, I'm doing stop
Yeah.
share, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Let me get over to Hannah and highlight her. That was beautiful reading. And thank you for explaining all of that about the lyric essay.
Thank you. I hope many more people will feel drawn to it. It's an amazing form. So it's good for people with obsessions.
Yeah. I took an essay writing class from Grub Street like a couple of years ago, and then and each week we had to write a different type of essay, and it got to the lyric essay, and they're like, it's kind of like poetry. I'm like, oh, I don't know, I can't write poetry, but I guess I focused on something that comes to me like the closest to poetry, which is when I'm riding my bike in the wildflowers, and so I wrote about that. And it was published. Anyway, okay. I'd like to introduce our third author, Hannah Lillith Assadi. She teaches fiction at the Columbia University School of Arts. Her first novel, Sonara, received the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award in Literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and was a finalist for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize for Debut Fiction. In 2018, she was named a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. Her second novel, The Stars Are Not Yet Bells, this is the British cover, was recently published by Riverhead Books. She lives with her family in Brooklyn, New York. So Hannah, please take it away. Oh, I have to ask you to unmute. Sorry, hold on. Hannah, take it away in a second when I ask you to unmute. Okay. I thought I had done that already. Okay. Now, Hannah, take it away.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much, Julie, for having me. I wish, and it's so nice to be here. I wish I could be there in person. That would be even nicer, but this is good enough. And it was so nice to hear from you both, Dan and Geula, just about your family story, Dan, and hearing you read, and also the lyric essay was so beautiful. It's one of my favorite forms, and sort of the repetition of smoking and breathing. I can relate to that, being currently an ex-smoker. But anyway, but aside from that, there was a lot of beauty in that essay. Thank you. So yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm used to just hopping into a reading. So yeah, I'm Hannah, the author of 2 novels. The first, Sonora, has maybe a little more resonance with this audience, about the daughter of 2 parents, one, the mother being Israeli and the father being Palestinian, which has echoes to my own family story. My mom is not Israeli. She's an American Jew, and she's on this call. And my father is Palestinian from Safed or Safed, and his family left in 48. So that book, which had got some press in Israel, actually, maybe as, yeah, a little more resonance to this audience, but I'll just briefly, it's about sort of semi-autobiographical, although departs quite a bit from my life story, aside from the family background. But it is about a young woman growing up in Arizona, in the desert of Arizona, with this family. And she sort of suffers these sort of strange visions that are maybe semi-prophetic, maybe not. And she moves to New York with a friend, and there's sort of a curse at work, or they believe a curse at work in their high school, where they grew up, where kids keep dying in these strange ways. And there's this sort of belief that the high school was built on indigenous land, and that maybe something had happened there that was causing these strange deaths. But anyways, they come to New York and things seem to get worse. So there's a way in which there's sort of the historical family drama is sort of following and manifesting itself in different ways in this protagonist's life. So anyways, that's Sonora. And after it was published, while I was waiting for it to be published, I sort of had many ideas for different books, and I have a tendency to like start things and get to a certain point in them and realize that for whatever reason, they're just not breathing anymore on the page, and I sort of give up or abandon them or shelve them. But anyways, this book, The Stars Are Not Yet Bells, which just recently came out, the genesis of it sort of began about a month after Sonora was published, and I was on the Metro North with my mom going to visit my great aunt, Rhoda, who passed at the 100 years old in April of 2020. So no one got to say goodbye. One of those tragic COVID lonely deaths. But anyway, we were going to visit her, and I had just recently seen a photo of my grandmother with a man who none of us knew who he was, and they looked quite happy and quite in love. And we had asked my great aunt who he was, because they were very good friends, she and my grandmother, and she would not answer us. So we assumed she maybe knew who he was, but wouldn't share that with us. And my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and you know what I've heard about her, and I only met her once, and she was too sick for us to have any sort of interaction. I was also only 2, so I have no memory of it. But that, you know, she wasn't that happy in her life, so it made me wonder about how to write a book. First of all, from somebody's perspective who's suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's, because of the things such a perspective would illuminate about memory and time, both of which are themes I'm very interested in. So that was sort of the first sort of line of thought on this train going from Grand Central north to Larchmont, where my great aunt lived. And also about somebody who loved somebody in the past and never got to be with them. So there was sort of the romantic angle. So those kind of 2 threads began working themselves away in my mind, and they were sort of the genesis of the book. But also my maternal grandparents were, as I said, they were Jewish, and they were, you know, the children of immigrants to the US in the late 19th century from Romania and Poland. And my great grandfather had a textile business in Manhattan and sent my grandfather to the South, to Alabama, to run a factory there. So when he married my grandmother, who was also from New York City, they both went down to this very small town in Alabama, and they were the only Jews there. And I'd always kind of wanted to write about this sort of existence. And it is certainly, it departs quite a bit from their story in my book. It's heavily fictionalized. It's set on a barrier beach island off the coast of Georgia. But there are some elements from that very small town that kind of made it into the book. And I also wanted to talk about sort of late capitalism in America and the way that their industry was kind of, you know, maybe one of the last of its kind. So there's a decline in the woman's memory, as there's a decline in the husband's business. Those are kind of 2 arcs that take place in the book and mirror my grandparents' story. So anyway, that's sort of the background of this book, and how it relates to my own family. And I will just read from the beginning. I think you know that enough about the family and just about the book in general. It's about a woman with a form of dementia who, as she, you know, as the illness begins to take hold, she begins to live more and more in the past with this old love of hers, a lover who has died, actually. And she's lived on this island that is known for this sort of mythical gem, right, that they went down looking for, a gem, like a sort of diamond-like gem that was rumored to be in the waters offshore. But as she, simultaneous to her living more and more in the past with this old lover, as she gets sicker, she also begins to see these blue lights, and they may or may not be related to these gems. So that's the sort of background of the book. Okay, so I'm going to read from the very beginning, and just for a few minutes. 1. It is not yet the end. Moss descends from the oaks, thick as curtains, veiling the night's secrets from the living. A wild mare and her foal are out to feed before the dawn. Seagulls bark their hunger at the sky, and Lyra, our island, remains above the sea. The ocean has not engulfed all this, even though I have woken from that dream I've had again and again over the decades. In last night's rendering, after the island had burned and sunken into the waters, and all the stars had fallen into the Atlantic, I could still swim. And beneath the surface, wandering among the blue constellations like a mermaid, at last I found Gabriel. 2. But it is not the story of a drowned ghost haunting my dreams that Dr. Madera wants from me. He says I must focus on the facts. Dr. Madera has commanded that I report the story of myself, the real story, every morning. Should I get lost, he has offered me helpful mnemonic exercises. What is your name? What is your age? Where do you live? What year is it? Who is your husband? What are the names of your children? What is the weather like today? The wind smells of rain. My name is El Rainier. It is May the 13th, 1997. A voice talks at me from the radio, telling me that the market has turned for the worse. The Israelis and Palestinians are at war. Snow falls late in the north. The broadcast makes it sound as if the world is finally ending. I no longer tremble at signs of the apocalypse, since my own was prophesied for me in a fluorescent medical office some time ago. At the start of the Second World War, I moved from New York City to Lyra Island, population 400, most of whom until these last years were employed by my husband, Simon. We have lived since then on this strip of land, woolly with oak, off the coast of southern Georgia. The dunes here shimmer white as snow. Wild horses roam, ancient and unapproachable as unicorns. Storms trample us in this part of the world. We are the midwife of the ocean's wrath. Hurricanes have ravaged my garden many times over. Until this year, I've always been able to revive my rose bushes. Our home was built on the foundation of a previous one, which was built on the foundation of one before that. Both houses burned to the ground a century apart. The island has never wanted us. Back in 41, the three of us, Gabriel, Simon, and I, had anchored at the dock on the riverside rather than the oceans, where the irreverent tangle of oak recalls the woods of some fairy tale. I knew even then that I'd become lost in them. The path to the house was scarcely marked by an ancient sandy trail. There has only ever been the one dirt road carving its way through the island, from the town in the south to the northern settlement. Our house stood on Lyra's highest ground, right in the middle. It was Elijah, at first the groundskeeper, and later Simon's ship watch leader, who guided us to our new habitat, which stank of earth and ocean and fire. We were city people and startled by the sound of our own feet crushing the leaves beneath us. But it was not the land itself that would curtail our welcome. Once the house was before us, I gazed at it in awe, the stone stairways rising into a menagerie of vines, veiling more windows than I could count, the ground so spacious that a wild horse gnawing on the lawn seemed the size of a dog. Even the light overhead was of a different quality, more persistent in its splendor. I wondered to myself how a person would not go missing in such a place. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much. I'm gonna add spotlights for all of our authors here. Hey, where's Geula? There you are. Yeah. You guys can put your put questions in the chat box. And Dan, I have to ask you to unmute. I saw already there was a question for Geula from Chaim.
That's a good, I read that question. It's a very good one, and I actually don't have an answer.
Which was, how did you decide which biblical translations to use?
I think I went with a bunch of them. I cannot, I went with the best, with whatever sounded most lyric and whatever worked best with the text. I don't actually know if that's a problem with, I didn't actually mention which verse was translated by whom. I guess it would be too much, but I guess like a mix of King James and what else exists but King James? I don't know. No, I use everything from online, but they are the actual biblical verse and quotes. That's all I can say.
So I have some questions for you guys, and if you have questions for each other, please just jump in. I'll start with Hannah. I just read your book. I finished it yesterday. And you mentioned that, well, first of all, you do an amazing, very skillful job at getting into the mind of Elle, the main character who has Alzheimer's or dementia. And you kind of, I don't know how you did it, but I don't know if you had to do a lot of research into how Alzheimer's, dementia patients think of things, like what's going on in their mind. So that was really impressive. But I wanted to ask you, because in the book, they're not Jewish, right? Why did you, what was your thinking behind that, if it was kind of based on your grandparents' story?
Yeah, I don't know if it's not stated, right?
Not stated, but well,
yeah,
they go to church or something. There's something about church in there.
Yeah, he plays for the church.
Okay.
He plays piano for the church, but which my grandfather did. It's not stated. And I think part of my intentionality is that nobody's identities, I think, are explicitly stated. I think there's some, you can intuit pretty much most of them, but I think I really wanted to write something, I hate to put it so crudely, that was really just about money. Like in terms of this, that was about money, right? And how it cursed and consumed these people in different ways, despite their identities. So that was my intention. But I think you could, it's not stated there, there were many Jews in the gem and jewel business. So, right. So I think and that's for his family.
I wasn't thinking
Okay. So, like if you reading it, knowing my biography, you could maybe find details of it, but it's not stated explicitly.
Right. The mother, like Elle's mother is Russian, came from Russia, you said. So I was like waiting, like, okay. But,
Yeah. No. I mean, anyway, that was a decision. I don't know if it was the right one, but that was the intention behind it.
No, I mean, I guess it was because like the main story was not about religion at all. It's about her life and her former lover and their marriage and how that works. And so okay. There's another question for you in here, which is from Shoshana Sarah. As a person with grandparents from a tiny town in Alabama, I have to ask, which small town in Alabama?
Oh wow. Florala. Hi. Which is on the border, and my mom's here too. She can speak to it better than I can probably, but it's on the border of Floral and Alabama. It's just, right on the border. It's near Andalusia. It's like the southeastern corner. Is that right, Mom? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I've been there enough times to know. I've actually been there more recently than anyone, but yeah. Shoshana, is that close to? You can put it in the chat.
I have a question for Dan now, which is that, okay, you've written your family story. Are you going to continue writing? Like,
So
write other things?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've always loved to write. I mean, publicly, people have known me as a basketball player, but I've always considered myself a writer who plays basketball. That's really been my first love. And when I came home from practice as a kid, I'd write, and my parents always knew that. So there'll never be another story like this. You know, this is a big family story. It's a history I spent 5 years memorializing, you know, through the research and the writing process. But absolutely, I mean, writing is my love, and I'm going to continue to do it always.
So that brings up a question really that I have for all three of you, which is like how much research do you have to do into each of your respective works?
I can. Oh, sorry, you go down.
No, please go.
I mean, well, for me, I guess, well, there was the biblical research. The images, I would jump from different kinds of stories, so I would read as much as I could about each biblical story, whether it was Mary Magdalene and history about her, or Lilith, for instance. Hannah, I didn't read the Lilith section because I saw that your second name is Lilith, which is gorgeous, but Lilith has a part in the chapbook too. I guess I did a lot of reading of the factual, the images of the weaving that I would bring through. I didn't do that much research on my family. It was more just about what memories were brought up by what images. So I kind of just went off that. It wasn't that much research in that sense. So that was mine.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, mine was quite a bit of research, you know, trying to piece together this very complicated intergenerational story. So a year and a half it took, right? I mean, interviews with primary sources, primarily my grandmother, my dad, family and friends all over the world, but then also just trying to contextualize our story within the history, right? So leveraging the Holocaust Museum and Yad Vashem and all these other resources. So yeah, it was a year and a half before I had the picture of the story that I then wanted to start writing.
Yeah, for me, first of all, I'd love to read the Lilith section. But yeah, for me, I think I did do some sort of very elementary research into Alzheimer's and dementia, and like sort of more like how it manifests itself, like behavior wise. So I could do the characterization, you know, as close to accurate as possible, although there's a lot of imagining in here in terms of her either hallucinations or her ability to see these lights, right? So some of that is my own hopeful projections into something that may not just be illness. Perhaps it's also opening her abilities to see things that we cannot. But anyway, how would we know, right? But I also did some travel research. We went to Florala, the town I mentioned, for some time in 2017 while I was writing it. And we also spent time on Cumberland Island, which is a barrier beach island off the coast of Georgia, and camped there because there's only one hotel that remains on that island. It was formerly owned by the Carnegies, and now owned by the National Park Service. So we camped there for a few days in freezing weather, and also went back into another island some years later and did some research on the kind of the Geula, which is a tribe that has lived there. In the region as well. So anyway, yeah.
I actually wanted to ask you about that, Hannah. So I guess you were drawn to the Alzheimer's because of your grandmother, even though you were 2 when you, is that what you said? You didn't really know her that much personally?
Yeah, no.
When you were 2?
I was only 2. Yeah. So
I mean, this is then my assumption, but I'm assuming it affected your parents, that's the way she, I guess, grew old and eventually passed away. And I'm wondering if I guess this is a generational question, the same for Dan. It's like, I guess that, you know, this kind of generational suffering or experiences, you know, how far does it come, you know, then to your parents who experienced, you know, or your mother specifically experienced your grandmother her last phases of her life in that way. And then that trickled down onto you, even though that you didn't experience it specifically, but you felt compelled enough to write a whole book and, you know, research Alzheimer's. So I guess the question is, you know, these things that drive us, that are so, you know, generational, things that haunt us, even as third generation. I find it striking that that's something you invest so much time in and are so obsessed with. Same for Dan. You know, this very strong. I mean, your grandparents were alive when you were able to experience it, but I don't know. I don't know what the question is. It was just a comment for both on that.
Yeah, Dan, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. Sure. Listen, I'll say, like, intergenerational trauma is real, you know, and certainly for me, I feel an obligation or responsibility based off of what my grandparents went through, based on what my dad went through, you know, as an immigrant in America. And so, and I discuss this a lot in my book, those feelings and the responsibility that you do have. And so it's interesting how it's reflected in different ways through all of our writings, but I think it's a very real phenomenon.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that this, my mom's here, I think this affected her in a more immediate way than me. And, you know, obviously, intergenerational and, you know, generational trauma is certainly real. But I think intellectually, I was always just, you know, also, I mean, obviously there's the familial aspect that gives it a little more urgency, but I was just intellectually also interested in exploring a perspective. And of course, I'm sure I failed, right? Because I am not somebody, that's by virtue of like never having yet, hopefully, and never will experience having dementia. But I think I was just, you know, curious. So there was some of that as well.
I can feel that. Like, I prefer to write things that are people that are definitely not me, you know, so I can identify with that, wanting to put yourself in somebody else's shoes completely. But I think you did a great job with it. I mean, I also haven't, and hopefully will never know, you know, dementia either from firsthand experience, but you did a great job with it. It feels very authentic, you know, the kind of ramblings of her mind. Okay, here's my next question for you all, which is, what are you working on now, if you're working?
You guys want to go first?
I'll say that, you know, my book came out fairly recently, you know, so, and the response has been great. And so we're working on telling the story in different formats, which is really exciting. And so very committed to that. And then also, it's cool, Hannah, to hear you say that, like, your second book started kind of to germinate a month after your first book came out, you know, because like now I also see myself kind of noodling on some other ideas. And again, like for me, what I wrote, there's only one of those, but, you know, toying with some other writing projects, but definitely trying to pursue some of these opportunities with this story and you know, get it out there in a little more broad fashion. So fingers crossed that there'll be news on that semi-shortly.
Yeah, I feel like one helps sort of propel the other, for sure. I'm sort of, I guess, like last time I was working on something for a while that I've like put aside for a little bit, and now I feel like I'm working on something that's a little bit more maybe autobiographical. We'll see. And I'm also interested in, but I don't want to talk about it more than that because it's, you know, it's so it's in utero. And yeah, I'm thinking, and I've been thinking more and more about trying to write something for the screen, because I'm a visual person, and I feel like that would be an interesting, probably impossible, but maybe not impossible thing to try. So that's something I'm doing some research on somebody else's story, and maybe trying to figure out how to write a screenplay. So.
Okay, so for me, actually, this chapbook that I wrote, it was a part of my my MFA thesis. So I wrote it a few years ago, more like 7 years ago, and edited it since, and then it got published. But for the past few years, I've been working on poetry that's related to postpartum experience, I guess pregnancy and birth and postpartum. So I have a manuscript that I'm working on that has been going out. And I mean, I gave birth 7 months ago to the second, so it's been very hard to write. I think all three of us are parents, so that's another question, you know, the artist writer versus parenting balance / whether your mind actually or your brain is actually there to cope, whether there's time or not. So I guess right now, for now, I'm just in survival mode. So yeah, when I can't write, I really I try to do a lot of reading. Right now, I'm not able to get into fiction. I can get into memoir, again, more creative nonfiction, and mainly poetry, just because I actually have time for poetry. I can read a poem here and there and feel like I've done something with my day. So yeah, I really believe in the times when there's no actual project, to just soak in as much writing as I can, and see where that will take me, whether I'll be inspired. I mean, I know that I was able to write after the first birth, so I know that it's going to come back, and it's just patience. So trying to be kind to myself. That's also a big important part of the writing process. So yeah.
Either of you guys want to talk about that, what it's like to write with the little kids?
Challenging.
Yeah.
It changes everything, but you have to kind of, you know, recalibrate and you know, augment your approach a little bit. But I think that if it's in you, you find the time, you know, and you find the space. Of course, in the immediate aftermath of giving birth, there's no time and space for anything, and I think you have to kind of accept that. But as things kind of get a little bit more stable, I think you figure it out.
Right.
Okay.
Baby's crying.
Well, I'll just ask one last, well, sorry, two last questions. Okay, first, and this helps me, Geula, when I'm in between projects and I don't know where to start, and which is prompts. I'm a big believer in writing prompts. And that's how my whole book got started. So I'll ask you all if you have a favorite writing prompt that you want to share with the group. We have a lot of writers on the call, so maybe we can take something from here.
It's so funny that I'm at a blank at the moment, because I use exercises like quite a bit in my teaching. So, and I feel like I haven't used one to start my own new project, which I probably should, but I'll just give one that I gave recently to my students. I don't know if it's my favorite, but I I like it, which is the recent one I gave was, you are a meteorologist and you've just been told that the world is ending tomorrow. What's your report of the weather? That's one of them. So
What's your what? Say that again.
it's your weather report.
Oh, what's
And the world is about to end, right? So anyway, that's one to get the people thinking about setting and describing also tone and mood, right? But I find like lots of limitations with writing prompts helps my students, right? So a very specific scenario, like not allowing them to like think too much actually makes them more creative in some ways, like think too much about what they're going to do. So anyway, that's one, but I've never written from it, so how would I know?
Geula, do you have one?
Yeah, well, I guess, yeah, for poetry, something that very often gets me started. I mean, I also always write with other books in front of me, so I'll pick a line or an image that really speaks to me and try and see where that takes me. But I agree with Hannah that having, you know, specific boundaries in poetry that it's very important because it's already such a small, compact form of text that I really think that the form of the litany is very effective. So you have a repetition. You do it's either 4, 4, 4, by, and numbers also help. So I'll do 1, 2, 3, and then using different images just to get the flow going. That's kind of a very basic one, but it always works. Not always, often works.
I can say that I don't use prompts much in my personal writing, but I'll tell you that I took a class at Stanford, a writing class with a professor I really admired, and he would have us do visual prompts where he would put a picture. I remember one of like a man and a woman kind of sitting separate at a bar with, there were a couple things, visual cues in the background, and just to write stories based off of visual images, I thought was really interesting. But in my personal writing, I don't really work much off of prompts.
So actually, Lynn asked a question for me in the chat, which is how did I write a whole book with prompts? I don't know if I wrote the whole book with prompts, but it started as a prompt. The prompt was write a story about someone who is definitely not you, which we were talking about earlier, and who does something that you're interested in. It can be a career or it could be a hobby, and you don't necessarily even have to know a lot about this interest, but you have to be curious about it. So I wrote a story about a Black woman, so obviously definitely not me, who has a landscape architect business, which also I know nothing about, but I like to putter around in my garden a little bit. And that story got really great feedback from my writing teacher, Evan Fallenberg, who's not here tonight, but he's a lot of you in the audience know him. And so that got such a great response. I decided to use the same prompt again for my next story in the class. So I wrote about an 82-year-old man who takes up baking, but I made it a little closer to me this time because I made him a Jewish man, and I do know something about baking. So, and when I was done writing that story, which became the final story in my book, I was really kind of taken with this character, and then I decided I wanted to write a whole book about him and to do it in the form of stories, and it became a novel in stories. But sometimes still, and now I may be writing a sequel or companion volume to that. I'm not sure. We'll see. But I just took this one story writing class, generative writing class, one story magazine based in Brooklyn. They have great online classes. And every January they have like a week-long generative writing class, and every day a different instructor comes on and gives a prompt, and it's all asynchronous, so I could like take the class at my hours. And so I took 2 different prompts from that week and have started kind of new stories around the same characters. So we'll see. So it can be done to write a whole book based on prompts. All right, does anyone have any other questions before we wrap things up? Okay, well, I have one last question for Geula, since you are a literary agent on here, and we have a lot of writers on the call. So any advice, what advice can you give to all?
Oh, wow. that's a whole separate
do a whole different webinar.
A whole separate Zoom.
Yeah.
But wow, what advice? Revise, edit. Even after your, I don't know, 100th version, pay an editor who doesn't know you or your story to go over your work. Really, it's very important. Literary agents do editing before they submit novels or whatever form of writing that they submit to publishers, but it depends on how much work is necessary to be done, right? And we all know that writing is just rewriting. So I guess the biggest challenge for any writer is to try and get your writing objectively to the best state it can be in, and you really need other people for that. I don't think there's any writer who doesn't who doesn't need another writer or an editor to go over their work, and so I think a lot of writers that I know also are in workshops and writing groups, and they have some kind of support of other writers that they can, that know them and they trust to send their work to. So I think that would be my main my main advice as a literary agent. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, I want to say thank you to Dan and Hannah and Geula. This is great to hear from you and to hear you read from such like 3 completely different types of writing. It was amazing. And I wish you the best of luck as you're going on and promoting your work and with your future writing. And that's it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. I will send around
Thank you.
Thank you
link
for having
if
us.
you were late. I'm going to send around the link to the recording tomorrow, along with more information about where you can buy their books and about the future events. So see you back here next month. March 20th is our next event. Have a great night or day wherever you are.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.